All right, good evening, everyone. It's Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, so it's time to check out some other stuff here. I'm going to switch over into Adobe After Effects right now, and I've got some stuff planned around tying visuals and motion to audio data, which I think is pretty cool. It's one of the things that I've always been interested in when using After Effects. And whenever I get a chance to do stuff like this, it's always fun to play around. So that's what I'm going to do tonight. It's just playing around, you know? So hope you're all doing okay. And let's start it up here. So I've got just a basic project here, an AEP file that I've created. And I need to create a new composition first of all to start doing some stuff here. I've already brought in some audio files and bitmap images. So I have an image file here, which is the album cover to some of this audio, and then just a couple tracks. So we've got a couple tracks to play with if we want to. We might not need both of these, but I've got two different ones just in case. So let's create a new composition. And for this, I almost always stick to 1280 by 720. I don't have any like 4K ready displays or anything. Well, that's not true actually now, but generally most of my displays can't show this sort of thing, right? So what I'm going to do is just give this a composition name. So audio motion, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to use HDTV 720, 29.97. And that's a 1280 by 720. And square pixels, most importantly. And in terms of duration, I think I already figured out that this track here, Razor Palm, is actually around 3 minutes, 20 seconds, 3 minutes, 18 seconds, whatever that might be. Let's fix that up, 320. I'm going to hit OK. All right. So here we have our new comp, and it shows up right here, audio motion. And the first thing I'm going to do is choose something. So I'm going to get Razor Palm here, bring that down into my timeline in my layers. And there we go. So let's see. Just keeping an eye on the chat. Oh, hello. I see someone has greeted me, so I greet you back. Hello, welcome. And here is the album cover for this. So let's bring that in as well. We'll just pull that up right there. So, I don't know. I mean, I think the first thing I'm going to do is just set this initial cover, just like blur it out a little bit, make it a nice background image. And then we'll tie some of this audio data to it in different ways. So in my effects and presets, let's look for some kind of a blur. And under blur and sharpen, I just want a regular Gaussian blur, just a simple blur. Drag it on there. And then I can take the slider and define my blurriness. I also want to darken this a bit. So let's go to image controls. And I ain't going to do it. Maybe I'll just browse for it because I can't remember what things are called. Brightness. Brightness and contrast. Put that on there. And let's pull the brightness down a bit. Just darken that up nicely. All right. So that gives us a nice background for us to work with. And you know what? I'm not going to really do much of anything to that background, except just kind of lock it down there. It's going to be exactly as it is here. So I'm going to look at two different approaches this evening to messing with messing with audio and motion inside of After Effects, tying these things together. The first one I'm going to look for is going to be tied to a solid. So I need to create a new solid. Oops. New solid. And for this, it's going to be 1280 by 720. The color doesn't really matter. This is going to be a representation of my actual audio. So I'll just call this rep and hit OK. And there we go. I got a big black rectangle here over everything else. And then if you search for audio inside of your effects, under the generate category, you can find two. There's audio spectrum and audio waveform. So audio spectrum is going to grab everything from the lows to the highs and map that out in certain ways. And audio waveform is going to be more like the actual waveform of the audio. So I think for our purposes here, I'm going to do audio spectrum. Just pull that directly onto that solid we created. So as you can see, the solid goes away. And we've got this weird little indicator here. But this is actually the waveform. And if we scrub this, oops. First, if we set our audio layer inside the audio spectrum. So right now it's just, it's tied to the solid itself that we brought it onto, right? But you can see here, I can choose Razor Palm, our MP3 file. And now it looks a little different because it's actually grabbing that audio data and using that to display visuals. And you can see as I scrub here, we've got some movement. And what we've got is basically these are the lows. This is the low end. These are the mids. And here's the highs. So what I want to do is reposition this. I don't want it in the center of my item here. So there are a number of different effects you can do for the audio spectrum. And let's see. You can also define the start and end frequency, which is pretty interesting to mess with. So you can see how that changes things. So for instance, I happen to know that, this particular track is really heavy on the lows. So if I wanted to emphasize that, I could diminish the highs that are being used here and only show stuff towards the lower frequencies, which is pretty convenient. Start point, let's go ahead and make some adjustments here. I'm going to put that way over, actually off the edge. The same thing, I want it down below. Then for this guy, my endpoint, I'm going to put him down here as well. So you can apply all sorts of different effects, like transformational effects and distortion effects and things like that, to both the audio spectrum and audio waveform. Like you'll see oftentimes you can make it like a circle and the waveforms are coming out of it like that. All sorts of different things. We're going to do something a little different. We're going to keep it as a linear spectrum here. So let's see. A couple other things we can do. We can change the number of bands in our frequency. So we can really bump that up if we want to. And you'll notice they're not really moving that much right now. So what we need to do here is change our maximum height. Change the thickness, the softness, all sorts of different things. You can always change this too from digital to analog lines or dots, which is kind of fun. I do kind of like the dots sometimes. So if we change it to dots, actually I need to bump this up quite a bit. And Let's see here. Oh, so we only need side A for one thing. That's everything that's up top of that line. We don't need side B. And we can always change the colors if we want to. So if I want to change this to something more white, and then something that's kind of like an orange red color.
Which cannot be stopped.
I'm trying to recall, as I'm doing this, exactly how some of this works. Because it doesn't seem to be moving, and I know there's a parameter to actually make adjustments to that. For one thing, the thickness, yeah. Audio offset. Maximum height. I think I might have my frequencies messed up from before. Unfortunately. And actually, I think I've goofed that up quite a bit. I'm not quite sure why it is not jumping like it should be. I know I'm missing something like super duper obvious here. So I've got my audio layer as source. Let's reset both of these. All right, now we're getting some jumping, but there we go. So that was the problem, the start and end frequency. So I've reset both of those. I shouldn't have goofed with it, right? So I always like it when After Effects does this. If it's like too intense, the motion for your computer, After Effects will actually like, the audio will kind of like grind to a halt. You know, it'll be just like just kind of fun. So I'm gonna take that to a third. All right. So that's analog dots. We got analog lines, which is more like this. So you can see there's definitely a lot more in the lower frequencies here. So let's see, we got 2000. Yeah, so I pulled that way up. So let's actually emphasize those lower frequencies. And I do not want analog lines, I want digital. All right, that's still looking okay. Let's give it a little more life in terms of color. You know, I mean, this stuff is, of course, completely up to you and what you want to do with what you're working with. Let's take that maximum height down a little bit.
This blade in your hand.
So that's pretty good. That's the sort of thing I'm looking for. And let's see. Yeah, so this is in terms of After Effects and what you can do with, you know, probably the most simple way to create motion inside of After Effects using audio data. I mean, this is pretty simple, right? You just add the effect to a solid, you tweak the parameters, and then it's good to go. There's additional things you can do, of course. We've played with the thickness a bit, the softness, so we can make it really sharp if we want to, or we can make it very soft. You get your colors, and then your frequencies and so forth. So one thing that I want to do is you can actually change the blend mode to any of this stuff. So if I change this to something like Vivid Light, you can see the blend modes work just fine on these effects. Exclusion, hard mix.
As petals needle her.
Let's find something that's suitable here. Dancing Dissolve is always kind of fun. It shows like a little bit, you probably can't even see it from here, but if I zoom in like 800%, and then scroll forever, you can kind of see how these little dancing dissolves work. So you can see them right there. It's kind of fun. Anyway, that's not really what we're looking for. Let's go back to fit up to 100%.
Shadows wither as palms blossom, smiling red. Down upon the floor.
So let's collapse this. And I wonder, you know, we could put some additional filters on here, but I don't know. It's looking pretty good. I don't want to kind of ruin it, you know? So let's just leave it at that. So in terms of distortion, I did mention distortion before. You can do all sorts of stuff inside of here, like displacement and turbulence and spherize and transform and all that stuff. And you can actually like wrap this around to make it circular or make it bulge or make it arc, all sorts of things like that. So you don't necessarily need to keep it at, you know, just these straight lines. Actually, that is one thing I want to just tweak a little bit is, you know, just how many bands of frequency we have here. Yeah. That's better. And maybe just take the maximum height down a little bit more. Just these guys are peaking down here like quite a bit.
Sustain me with this pain.
All right. So we got that. That's all set. There is, as I mentioned, another piece that we want to look at, right? And that has to do more with interpreting the data and applying it to some other object. So in this case, we're not going to use an effect to do this. Let's actually lock down that solid because that's going to be considered complete at this point. It looks really good. Very clean. What we're going to do is secondary to that. So if I go back into my project here, I'm actually going to pull out another instance of our cover PNG. Just put it above everything else in the timeline inside the layer stack. And just like most other Adobe apps, if you hold down Shift, it's gonna, of course, constrain those proportions so your width and your height aren't going to get all goofed up as you're resizing and transforming this stuff. Every time I play inside of After Effects, I'm like, I should really play with more After Effects. There's just so much stuff you can do in it. All right, so what we want to do now is actually have the cover art here sort of respond to the amplitude of the sound. So in order to do that, there are a couple things we need to do here. The first thing is we need to right-click on our actual MP3 that's in the timeline. And when we do that, we get all these different options, right? So we can place effects through here, through the right-click menu. We've got transforms, frame blending, time, masking, all sorts of different stuff. We want to go to Keyframe Assistant. And notice the only thing that we have here, because there are no keyframes that are existing yet on here, is that we can convert our audio to keyframes. So this is super, super powerful. It will take all of the amplitude data from our audio file and create a new track, a new layer with that data as keyframes. So let's go ahead and click on that. And now we can lock down that audio file because there we go. We've got audio amplitude. And if we look at that, let's twirl everything down. We've got a left channel, we've got a right channel, and we've got both channels. So depending upon how you want to work with this, of course, left and right is only available if you're drawing your audio data from a stereo audio file. So I am doing that, and it doesn't really matter that much if I use right or left, but you can always actually remove anything you don't need. So I want to keep this as stereo. I'm going to keep it as both right here. And notice we get a little slider that goes with this. And if we turn on the graph editor here, let's pull this up a bit. And let's actually look at the slider in the graph editor. So here we can actually see all these little keyframes that signify the amplitude for what we're dealing with here. So if we go in here, we can see. How that works. Let's see, how's the stream going here? So I've got a good few people watching, so hello to anyone who is just coming in. We are midway through this project. It's probably not going to take all that long to finish up. This might be a shorter stream tonight, but that's fine. There are still some things that we're going to do here, and some of those things involve expressions. So I'm going to turn off my graph editor right now. And what I'm going to do is, let's see, twirl down my cover PNG and its transform settings. So in terms of this data right here inside of audio amplitude, I can apply the values of that data across time to any of the transformation properties on this particular bitmap image. So if I wanted to deal with scale, position, rotation, opacity, I could do that. Scale, of course, makes the most sense. And to do this, it's actually super, super easy. All you got to do is hold down Alt or Option, depending upon if you're on a Mac or Windows machine. And just click on that stopwatch. What that's going to do is bring out this expression editor right here. And right now we're at transform scale. And nothing happens. No change. What we're going to do is use the pick whip. And that's this little kind of like swirly thing here. And the pick whip is one of the things that I first learned how to use in After Effects probably like 15 years ago. I actually used this concept for a number of different rich internet applications using Flash Player. We had some like really robust cataloging that was built using Flash Player. And we needed a way to sort of like, map properties of different cataloged objects to, different values. So what we ended up doing was actually replicating the pick whip from After Effects inside of our Flash player based UI. And it worked out really, really well. It was a really cool way to do it. But I still love the pick whip. And if you're unfamiliar, you can see what it does is it pulls out this little line where you can then sort of assign some other property of some other layer to that value. So I'm going to place this right on my slider for my both channel effects on my audio amplitude data. And what happens is it writes out a little bit of code for us right here. So let's have a look. And you can see the result already. So here we go. If we start this out like way down here, since it starts out at 0, you don't see it at first. As the track progresses, as the amplitude rises and changes, the scale of our object is going to, mirror that change in value. Very nice. So you'll notice too, it's a little frenetic right now. And that's because we're not really doing any additional controls on this. Now, of course, you can see that it starts off like really, really small here. So if you wanted to get around that, you could always do something inside of the expression editor. Let's see. So if I wanted to, sort of adjust the scale, you could do plus and then open and close straight brackets. And then say like what you want that scale to be on both the X and the Y scale. So I could do 10, 10. We can see how that looks. So you can see here where it used to be 0 right there. And a scale of 0, of course, is going to make something completely invisible. Now it's overriding that to make it sort of like a minimum of 10, right? That's the starting point now instead of 0. And if I play it back, so we can see it's already bigger, right? And it already exists even when there's no sound going on, which is good. And that's probably, when she screams, that's probably the maximum that it's going to actually scale up. So it's looking pretty good as it is right now. And as you can see, it goes through this whole thing. And you've got two things going on here. You've got the actual spectrum data right there. And you have the image that is responding to what we're actually working with. But there are some additional things you can do inside of here. And what I'm going to do is put some constraints on what we have going on in terms of how big and how small it can get. And that's actually done inside of our audio amplitude data. So let's go ahead and Alt-click on the stopwatch for our both channels slider to bring up our expression editor here. So right now the effect being applied, both channels. I've already got a snippet here. So we're doing an ease, value, which is of course the value of the amplitude at each point, each keyframe. And then we've got the minimum and maximum that we want to pass through and actually register visually. So let's have a look at that. So you can see with these values, it's not even moving yet. When it gets to here though, there it goes. Because if you remember, inside the graph editor, if we scrub over, you can see this goes from 0 units up to like 50 units of amplitude. So right here, the amplitude is anywhere between 35 and 40. And if I turn off my graph editor, I'm looking at 30 and 40 right here. So I probably want to take that down a bit. Let's go to 20. And maybe 38 or 36. I don't want to let too much of that really high stuff through. And numbers like this, you just have to kind of play with as you're going through here. Love it.
This blade, bring your hand.
So I don't think there's actually enough room. I want some more stuff in here. So let's take it down some more. Let's take it down to 10. And let's actually, I don't know, maybe keep it at 30, see what happens. So at 10, we got a little bit of movement here, which is good, because I think it stayed a little too, visually silent at the beginning here. Maybe a little too much. And remember, you can always go back and check out your graph editor, or you can just keep plugging numbers in. So I'm going to take this down 11, 42. Let's put a little more emphasis on there. It's a little wild. 36.
Palms blossom, smiling red.
All right. So as you can see, we've gone through and we've done a number of different things in order to represent the audio data in a visual way. So both through our, if we look on our solid here, where is our solid? There it is. So inside our solid, we have our audio spectrum, which we have complete control over. There it is. And then we're also going through and using the audio amplitude data that we drew from the MP3 file in order to adjust the scale of our content here. So pretty good. I think this is almost done. One thing that might be really neat is to actually map something else to this, because I think it's a little too static right now. So in terms of that cover, I'm gonna lock everything else down again. Before we leave tonight, I want to make sure to maybe blur this guy out a bit. There's so many different blurs, and I don't know what half of them do. Maybe not a blur. Maybe let's do some kind of like light generation. Light leaks. light rays. Let's put some light rays on there. So we can mess with intensity, center point, which I just did, radius, softness, things like that. Ugh. It's not exactly what I wanted. Oops. Those aren't the light rays I want at all. That's better. All right, light burst. There we go. There we go. So we got intensity. We've got ray length. And we've got burst. I am definitely thinking ray length is the property to mess with here. So, of course, what we're going to do, just like before, I'm going to do an Alt or Option click, Effects, CC Light Burst, Ray Length. Then I'm going to grab that pick whip again, pop it right onto my slider. So you can hear it's having some trouble keeping up, but you can also see that it is in fact applying that as intended to what we have going on here. So I'm going to have to take this down to a quarter playback. Yeah, like right there, it's like, can I even read that? But remember, if it's at full, it's going to be a lot easier to read, right? When it's not jumping around everywhere on the screen. So, I don't know. It's pretty good. It's fine. I tend to kind of fuss over stuff like this a lot. Yeah, you can see it's going again. If we turn off this effect. So something you could do in this case is you could always like duplicate that layer with the cover art right here and just keep everything mapped like it is and do some cool blending effects and stuff like that to it. So if I go ahead and duplicate this, so Command or Control D in After Effects to duplicate a track. And then we will, gosh, I don't know. Let's move it where I can see it. Ooh, that's sweet. Ooh, I like that. Jeez, look at that. All right. Yeah. And I mean, as you can see here, it's with that level of effect placed on it, it's going to be just kind of like all over the place, you know? So it is what it is. The machine I'm working at here is a bit older, but that's okay. Everything seems to be locked down nicely. We can still see that null layer. So, I mean, one thing you can always do, and you can see here it's playing from RAM, it's going at like 1.4 FPS. And, you know, not real time at all. But one of the cool things about After Effects, of course, is you can see down here above the timeline, we're getting this little green strip, right? And what that tells us is that that's the amount of content that's being visually rendered right now. So whereas if I'm playing it back and actually rendering the stuff, you know, it's going by super slow. If I actually hit my space bar, that little green bit stays. So I can play this back now at real time.
which cannot be stopped.
And of course, we ran out again. But anyway, I think this has been a fun experiment. And for the people watching live, thanks for hanging around and checking this out. I think we're good. There's not too much more I could do with this. I'm very pleased with it. And let's see, even though it is like a complete distortion of the actual cover art here. Yeah. So for those of you who are watching the replay, thank you for watching the replay as well. And generally, I'm here every Thursday, 6 p.m. And I do all sorts of different stuff. So I go from Animate to After Effects. I did some InDesign one week. Actually, next week, I don't know. I've got kind of two things in the till here. I want to do some fresco stuff because I like fresco a lot. And I like doing watercolors, and I like doing oils in fresco and charcoals. Now you can do charcoals in fresco, pretty cool. So I want to do some of that stuff, but I also want to mess with some of the lip sync stuff inside of Animate. A lot of Animate stuff, because Animate is fairly underrepresented. All over the place. So Animate is awesome. Check it out. After Effects is awesome. It's all good. All right. Well, I think that's it. So thank you again. See you all next time. And yeah, awesome. Everybody stay safe.